Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Sustainable Tallahassee's Green Drinks, this for the month of September. I believe this is now our 6th month of doing this online, and I don't think any one of us would have guessed that it would have gone this long, but again, here we are, and we thank you for joining us once again. Just want to take a moment to thank everyone who came out for our virtual EV Expo over the weekend, especially our speakers and our presenters. We had 7 members of Sustainable Tallahassee's EV Club come out and talk about their electric vehicles, the benefits, the reason why they wanted to switch to electric, and just tell us a little bit about the details of their cars. And it was a really great presentation that is available here on our Facebook page. The entire thing was recorded, and so if you have any questions for any of those presenters, please feel free to reach out to us at sustainabletallahassee.org, and we'd be happy to put you in contact with those EV owners. Tonight's show is a great one. We are joined by Dr. Kathryn Ziewitz, educator, author, and program manager whose work focuses on promoting sustainable community development. She's currently the director of the Sustainability Institute of Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and previously worked on a grassroots revitalization project for the waterfront community of St. Andrews in Panama City. Her presentation tonight is titled Regeneration, a Paradigm of Hope. And I'm going to bring her in and ask her to tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, well, I'm just really happy to be here, and I want to kind of zip along, hold on to your hats, because we're going to whirl along quickly here, hopefully having some time for questions.
Sure. So I will put your presentation up right now. And folks, always remember, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the comments. We will read them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A, but go ahead and post all throughout the presentation.
Great.
Whenever you're ready, Kathryn.
Well, it is such a privilege to be here at Virtual Green Drinks with friends and friends I haven't met yet at Sustainable Tallahassee. This talk is about the focus of my scholarly work, which is landscape production and the barriers and opportunities that we face in the quest to develop more sustainable places on our planet. My inquiry is focused on what factors and drivers actually make places sustainable. So this topic is really near and dear to my heart. And I think in the midst of COVID-19, as we're hitting the pause button on life as it was, it's a perfect opportunity to think about building new and better pathways instead of returning to the old normal that was anything but sustainability. So I'm going to do some storytelling here, and hopefully I can get on to the next slide, which isn't working. Okay, so what is meant by regeneration? Well, a battery is a great metaphor for this concept, and I'm borrowing this from Shramsky, Gaddy, and Brown, who in 1925 published a really sobering study of how much we've drawn down the planet's resources, kind of like the human footprint. So if you think about ourselves and the earth as living, breathing batteries, we want to think about how we can recharge the planet and ourselves. And the concept of sustainability is really about tweaking things here and there around the edges of our current systems. And we just know that this hasn't worked. This isn't sufficient to turn around the freight trains that are descending on us, including climate change, water shortages, biodiversity loss, human suffering, and so forth. So while we all hope that triple bottom line thinking is going to kick in really soon, we need to shift instead to thinking about how can we rebuild what we have drawn down on the battery of Earth. So really what we're thinking about is capturing surplus energy, and that actually begins with our own internal energy to tackle these problems. So what I'm doing is sharing some stories to try to get your personal batteries all charged up to go and do great things in the world.
Hey, Kathryn, can I
some of the principles
interrupt for just 1 second?
Yeah, Mike.
We're getting a really loud buzzing sound. If you have a pair of headphones or something like that that has a microphone on them.
No, hang on.
Oh.
I took everything electronic out of my room. Did that help?
No, I think it's actually the microphone from your computer itself. It's okay if there's nothing, don't worry about it. It's not that big a
Sorry.
deal.
Okay. Don't know what I can do. So, some principles for regeneration are getting the idea that we are in the same fate with nature. Nature is not separate from people. Nature isn't just in the national parks, the state parks, the park down the street. It's in the cracks of the sidewalk. We have to recognize that and no longer externalize the things that we're doing that are wrecking the very basis of our survival. So the great thing about regeneration is we have an abundance mindset. So if you just think about all the power, if you look in this picture here and see this photon from the sun just keep on coming. So that's how we can eventually have electric cars that are charged by the sun and so forth. So we have an abundance mindset, and we're going to introduce ethics into our decision making and with our science. So I'd like to, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, all right. So this is how landscapes are made. It just shows how much the humans are part of the process, especially as we have come to dominate the planet with our population. We have biophysical processes acting and we have social processes acting, and together they create the landscapes that we live in and that are our home. So as an example of this, think about the landscape in our backyard, the longleaf pine habitat. It's been in existence for the last 8,000 years. It's drastically changed, of course, in recent times, but this is what was going on since the Ice Ages, basically across a huge sweep of the coastal South. And this is what it looked like. It was extremely biodiverse, very complex interactions among all the creatures, down to the ticks that lived in the gopher tortoise holes, a special variety of ticks. Well, we have reshaped this landscape drastically. You can see just the scale of what the trees look like. Look at the size of the people there compared to the size of the trees. It's pretty incredible what happened here. And so beyond the appalling stack of timber, just notice the height of the trees and notice the spacing. See how the light's able to shine through there? That is what the original forest looked like. And these forests were decimated to make things like the timbers for the houses during the housing boom of the time. The cypress trees were logged for crates and, just crazy things that we put the use to. So you can see, look at what Tallahassee looked like after the cutout and get out logging. It doesn't look at all like that today. So my point here is that the landscape has been reshaped by us before, and now we have a chance to reshape it with a little more consciousness and good intent. So here's what we're dealing with now in terms of our forestry in the city, and this is the current tree canopy supplied by the city of Tallahassee. You can see the drastic range, and the area of FAMU is among the lowest in tree canopy for the whole city. So that's something that I'd like to see changing in the future. Okay, so this is what's happened across the globe. You can see that we started with 100% natural ecosystems, and over time we have turned the world to our purposes, which consists of a great deal of intensive agriculture. There's a new category there in the blue, the protected and recreational lands. Those didn't exist before, so it shows a potential for creating new land types. We have to take responsibility because we've already altered the planet. Now we can do it with the information that we have from science and trying to recreate and regenerate. So what regeneration is taking responsibility for this massive human role in the era of the Anthropocene and going ahead and trying to set things right. So regenerative agriculture and forestry actually builds soil, returns carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, and is a huge carbon sink. So that can do a whole lot of good. Then, of course, clean energy is something that Sustainable Tallahassee is really on top of, and transitioning to clean fuels and looking for ways to not have any kinds of emissions. Restorative and regenerative economies rebuild the people, not just preventing waste in the manufacturing cycle, but also looking for ways to have full employment in the ag sector. How do you give smallholders and women the employment they deserve? And all this ends up with communities that are restorative, where we're paying attention to how we transport ourselves, how we build, how we heat, how decisions are made, reconnecting ourselves with nature close at hand, and reinventing our home landscapes. And as a little teaser for how this presentation will end up, we're going to talk about how do we create wildlife habitat for the most numerous types of animals that are in existence. So you can be thinking about, I wonder what that group of animals is. So I'm going to go ahead and just do some stories. And as we notice that we haven't been sustainable on the earth, we also notice so many people are working for regeneration. So that's the inspiring part that I want to share. And I've just got a couple of stories here. The first one really sets the North Star for what we've done to have a land ethic at all. And this is the story of Aldo Leopold. And it began when he was working in New Mexico. He was in the national forest there as a young forester and wildlife manager. His job included shooting wolves. Wolves were killing the deer on the conservation land that it was his job to protect. But predation of deer wasn't the only problem. He noticed the area's vegetation was being eaten down to the nubs by the expanding deer populations. A vicious cycle was in effect, where the more deer there were, the less there was to eat, and the situation was only worsening. So after his observation contemplation, he realized wolves had been part of this system as they were previously, and they needed to be returned to restore the balance of deer, wolves, and the healthy vegetation. So to put it a different way, the battery that was the New Mexico mountains was being drawn down by misguided management practices. So after this epiphany, Aldo Leopold went on to help revolutionize wildlife management and develop what we call the land ethic today, where we realize that we're part of the natural community. So he applied this to his own land. He bought this played out farm in Wisconsin. You can see in the upper left what is a revered site for conservationists. It's the shack, Aldo Leopold's shack in Wisconsin. And there you can just see how devastated the landscape was when his family moved in there, and it became a family project actually for generations and generations to this day. One of his children is still involved in this site. So they went ahead and restored, and this is what it looks like today. So today it's a teeming, diverse prairie, forest land. It's a nature education center and does all kinds of great things. So the impacts, pioneering land restoration. The second story is also far from here in the prairie lands of the Great Plains that used to be dominated by prairie grasses, as you can see in the picture, and more recently have been turned to the industrial breadbasket of our country. And it went from multiple hundreds of grass species, animal species, to near monocultures across much of this landscape. these people who were friends of mine when I lived there in the 80s have been working for the last 40 years on regeneration. I thought I'd reach out to them and just see how to go for you guys. Well, it's amazing. They just kept at it. They started with a little 6-acre site and they started experimenting with how to gather seeds, how do you propagate this stuff, how do you plant it, how do you get support, how do you get funding. Well, after 40 years, they've done quite a bit and refined it. Here are some pictures that show the variety of seeds they collect. And you have to keep in mind that there's not much conservation land in Nebraska. So they're going among the ditches and the remnants and harvesting what they can from the prairie. And teaching a lot of kids along the way. Here's some people going ahead with the planting part of it. So their vision is to continue what they've done and expand prairie plantings along the waterways. And I think this is a great opportunity that our community hasn't really made the most of, is the riparian regeneration that we could do here, just highlighting our waterways and how they flow together and regenerating and putting trails and so forth. So I think it's a good model for us. Well, over the 40 years, they've been able to work on over 12,000 acres in 56 different counties. They've had a huge impact, and they've spent their lives well, and they're satisfied, which is really important for the personal part. Okay, we are now going to turn to our own area and talk about longleaf pine. You recall the picture of the domination of longleaf pine forests. I'm sure you've heard about that before, and how we're in a biodiversity hotspot, the 6th ranking biodiversity hotspot in the nation. And being a biodiversity hotspot isn't all a great thing, because it does mean that you have rare, endangered, special things. It also means they're threatened, and if we don't do something, we're going to lose them. So this example here is at a place called Spring Canyon. Helen Roth, who is now the president of the Florida Native Plant Society, was able to purchase this property in 2008 and begin restoration a few years later. And she worked with 100 acres of land that had been excluded from fire. And she went in and did massive removal of the brushy undergrowth. Lots of laurel oaks and sparkleberries were choking out the sunlight to the understory. It had never been really commercially logged. That's a mistake there, I'm sorry. But it was not maintained at all. There was no natural fire that went into it. So to help the land regenerate, she did a whole lot of cutting of brush and some burning, and received some technical assistance from state and federal agencies. And the land is now in a conservation easement, and it's thriving. Her area is to the right. That was a few years ago, so it's become even more open with more diversity. You notice the grass is on the right-hand side. The left at that time was just pretty much a biological desert of a forest that needed to be logged out. The great thing about this site, another great thing, is that it was an impetus. It became a nucleus for what is now a 700-acre swath of regenerated lands. The neighbors on both sides, including the place to the left, doesn't look like that anymore. It's on its way to restoration. And then another 450 acres were acquired. So all of these are going to be managed for wildlife and conservation. That's a lot of regeneration for a handful of people and their supporters to be part of at a personal level. So at this point, they've identified 390 different species of plants. That's pretty incredible. And that has benefited a lot of other animals too, including the gopher tortoise. So the next example has a pandemic tie to it. Okay, we're talking about agriculture, arguably the world's most essential industry. We have to eat, we have to drink first and have water, then we have to eat. So, and we saw the scope of land devoted to agriculture. Changing agriculture is essential to regenerating the planet. And we're lucky enough here to have a very innovative system going into effect for farmers who are small, mid-scale farmers not integrated into the whole complex industrial food system. They're starting to band together and grow. They formed an alliance in 2010, the Red Hills Small Farm Alliance, to help each other to survive economically, to develop themselves professionally, and to provide expanded access for food. In 2011, they developed their online market. Perhaps a lot of you have visited this site. You can order online and then arrange for your pickup, which is a little different these days during COVID, but it's still going on. In fact, during COVID, the Red Hills Small Farm online market surged in popularity, and this supported the farmers who weren't able to supply the restaurants that were a big part of their business, and it supplied fresh, high-quality food for residents who needed that at the time. So you can see how the numbers shot up in 2020. And it's important to note, too, some of these farmers teamed up with churches to distribute food for those in need in the communities where they grow. And the president of the alliance shared this boom. This was in the Tallahassee Democrat. Maybe you saw this, and said, hey, this is great. You've surged as customer base. Stay with us and we'll keep growing. And if you do that, we're going to change our regional food system. So this is something we can all do as eaters. So this is just really important from an economic regenerative point of view, that we can grow a regional agriculture system that cares about sustainability, regenerative practices, and wholesome good food, and the people who grow it, as well as those who eat it. Well, the final part of the presentation brings it back to home. So I put out a little teaser there, something we can do to support the most numerous and important animal group on the planet. Well, the animal group is bugs, insects. They make things go in the terrestrial ecosystem. And it's really amazing the message that Doug Tallamy has given, and other people that are promoting it have taken to heart about native plants. I always heard about native plants, but I never really got it, that the reason we need native plants is because native plants support native bugs, and birds and everything else need to eat these bugs to survive. So the little things that run the world, as E.O. Wilson said, are insects, invertebrates. So together, whether we're talking about just putting out a plant on your balcony, if you just have a sunny spot on a balcony, you can put something out there. There are examples of gardens that are just teeny, teeny, tiny in the middle of big urban areas that are supporting pollinators. So anyone can do this if you have just a shred of sunshine. So what we're doing is counteracting what we've created in terms of wildlife food deserts, lawnscapes with non-native plants, crepe myrtles and camellias and azaleas. Those are just food deserts for invertebrates. So we need to get rid of those and plant native things. We're witnessing the sixth extinction, and we may not be able to personally do something about the lions and tigers and elephants, but we certainly can support the food webs of which we are a part. So if we want biodiversity, let's feed the bugs. Most of the land in the eastern United States is in private ownership. We're lucky to be in an area of vast public lands, but public lands can't do everything. We've got to do it here. If you want to have birds in your yard, you better plant the right plants in your own yard. So shrink your lawn, start with trees, and I think this is something that we can do community-wide, conscious continued tree plantings. Sustainable Tallahassee's Community Carbon Fund was responsible for planting the colonnade of live oaks at Pedrick at the Alfred Greenway. I think we should resume those types of major plantings. And then choose the right plants. There's many places to go to find out what those are. Oaks are simply amazing. They can support 395 species of butterflies and moths. This is what it looks like if you notice the yard in the front compared to the yard in the back. You'll see a great bit of diversity in the plantings. This is my little attempt here. I'm just getting started. I ripped out the azaleas and I've put in about 20 or 30 different native plants in various parts of my yard, including the front there. So it all comes back to us and what we can do. And that's Doug Tallamy to the right. He's my current superhero, eco superhero. So following the principles of permaculture, take slow and steady steps, design for your own regeneration, and be sure to nourish your spirit by connecting with nature right at home and connecting with other people in a safe way. And don't give up on what you can do, because as Margaret Mead said, a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens is what changes the world. So these are 3 books that I've drawn great inspiration from, and I'm happy to share this. I've got a spreadsheet with the sources. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'm sorry that I went on a bit long.
No, thank you so much. It's a very interesting presentation. So folks, of course, if you have any questions, please go ahead and post them in the comments. Kathryn, I think I wanted to start off by asking, it seems to me that the key concept here is to take conservation and sustainability a step further and go beyond just simply not using as many resources or using the resources in a specific way to preserve some of them, to actively taking steps to replenish resources, to make things the way they were before we started to use them. Is that accurate, or is there more
right, Mike? And you can see the results. That's the thing. If we become psychic numbing, is a real hazard of being environmentally aware. As you know, this is something that the psychologists are talking about. So we just need to completely shift how we think. And I would love to do another presentation on the designing your own life for regeneration. That permaculture, People in Permaculture book is great about this, because really we are shifting our entire mindset. Instead of thinking, oh, I've done something, I've used something of this. Think about what we're building, what we can put back into the soil. If you picture the surface level of our environment, we just see what's on top. But if you start to imagine underneath it, the soil, the roots, everything that's going on down there, then you can start to think about things like carbon capture in a very concrete way. You can understand that what you do in your yard can affect sequestration, also provide landscapes where animals can thrive. You can see the difference when you look at the before and after pictures of Helen Roth's land. That was Regine Malignan and Tim's yard. You see they have attracted so many different types of wildlife to their yard that wasn't there before. So if you plant it, things will come. And the same concept, of course, can apply to manufacturing and industry. People are using biomimicry. Observation of nature is key. Observing how does nature do things, and let's try to build in a similar fashion, because nature has been working on this for eons and we're just finding it out. So yes, so the creative joy of building is part of the optimistic concept of regeneration.
One of the things you mentioned a couple of times is the importance of doing regenerative activities for biodiversity. Why is biodiversity important?
Well, take the example of insects. Imagine that we didn't have any. Before much time went by, we would be surrounded in a putrid environment because we wouldn't have organisms to break down the waste in our world. Another pretty sobering example that I heard a presentation about recently was the composition of species. Okay, if we don't have biodiversity, say we don't have enough plants to support caterpillars being extremely important for the food web. Okay, then we're only left with seed-eating birds. So we end up, we have a depauperate life where maybe we can have some mourning doves. You're never going to see chickadees and bluebirds and things like that again, but you can have a lot of mourning doves. Another thing you can have a lot of, actually, they're noticing as the diversity decreases, there's an increasing prevalence of rodents, okay? So I've always been a big advocate for snakes. It's like, okay, snakes, that is great. Why do I like snakes? I'm very respectful of them, mind you. But I like them because they eat rats, okay? Rats do really great when you have a depauperate fauna, okay? So it's really choosing what kind of future do we want. We know we could create oxygen mechanically. We can live on the moon. Look what happened in the biosphere experiments, though. Things just didn't go so well. So the intricacy of biological relationships just can't be replaced by technology.
So one of our questions here is, I would love to read the books that you showed. Could you list them again?
Sure.
Put your screen back up if you can go back to those. And maybe tell us a little bit about each one of them.
Sure, yes. Okay, the first book is something I wanted to prepare a worksheet for tonight that would guide people through an exercise on personal regeneration. And I've actually been doing this myself, and it's been enormously helpful. What you discover is the same principles, and Henry talked about permaculture in one of your recent talks, the same principles that you can apply to consciously designing a landscape, you can also apply to consciously designing your life to capture energy, to get the fruits and rewards, to make improvements, and so forth. So this, that's what the People and Permaculture book by Luby McNamara will teach you. And that book is available at the Leon County Library, and I will send a spreadsheet with these resources as well. The second book is Drawdown, and I'm sure a lot of you folks have already heard about this book. There's a living website called Project Drawdown. The entire concept of this book is based on regeneration. It's based on how do we actively go about assimilating the carbon that we've pumped out into the atmosphere. How do we change the amount of carbon by changing what we're eating, by getting rid of the kinds of refrigerants we use, by doing regenerative agriculture? Many of the things that I touched on in this talk, this book is, and the online companion list exactly the contribution in terms of drawing down carbon and the cost for those measures. The book, Nature's Best Hope, is Douglas Tallamy's new book, and he's the one that makes the connection between native plants and bugs and the importance of keeping our food webs alive. He emphasizes that since we've developed so much of our North American landscape, that we need to look at our yards as refuges and conservation areas. So I recommend all three of these books.
Well, great. Thank you so much for the brief synopsis of each one of them there. I think the only one of them that I've ever flipped through is Drawdown. And it's a very comprehensive book. I mean, as it says on its cover, the most comprehensive plan ever developed to reduce or to reverse climate change. And the reverse part there is where it ties into regeneration. It's not just a framework to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's a framework to actively pull them out of the air. And yeah, not just slow climate change, but reverse it. That's what I was looking for. A couple of comments here that I want to read, starting off with the first one. Dr. Z is amazing. What a great green drinks presentation. Always amazing when humans give up their ideas of knowing better and allowing nature to do its thing. Several comments about Red Hills Small Farm Alliance and the value that they provide both all the time and especially during quarantine. Drawdown's fantastic book. Like gifting it to my environmentally minded friends and colleagues. Question here. So you mentioned something about planting things even on a balcony. What are some other things that we can do living in an urban core to bring about regeneration?
Great question. And just because of the limits of time, I left out something I just always want to talk about, and that's composting. It is surprising how much food waste contributes to carbon emissions. So even if you're in an apartment, if you're ambitious, you can set up your own worm composting container, or you can contact Compost Community and they'll pick it up for you and regenerate your food scraps. And I think about 40% of what we put in the trash is organic material that could be composted and turned into good soil. So when I showed you the picture of my front yard, I wanted to show you a picture of my compost pile, but there just wasn't time. So I don't have to buy nutrients for composting. That's something about regenerative agriculture. It uses the ability of the plants and many different diverse plants to add minerals and all kinds of things to the soil at scale. I mean, I'm talking like the Rodale Institute, big scale regenerative farming does exist. Most of my examples were small scale. But other things at the household level, of course, it's you can regenerate yourself by making different food choices. And regenerating your own energy is something so powerful. I'm really on this jag this summer. It's a great time to do that. That It sounds kind of woo-woo, maybe that people in permaculture, but I highly recommend regenerating and investing in yourself and discovering the stores of energy you have. And I guess, Mike, do you have any other ideas at the personal household level? I've got the composting, I got the stuff you can grow.
To be honest, to take things beyond, to really move into regeneration as opposed to just sustainability and conservation. Tonight is really the first time I'm having to consider that as an additional, way of thinking. I think of some of the things that I do. I know myself. Energy efficiency, electric vehicles, kinds of things that reduce the amount of resources used, but for things that actively put resources back, I can't say that I do anything yet. So I'm really very interested to have you back on another Green Drinks here, hopefully soon, to talk about personal regeneration. Have a whole night focused just on that, because I think that's one area or one topic that I think our members, would be very interested in learning more about. Things that I can do personally to help. That's where we want to be. So with that, Kathryn, I want to thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us tonight. Like I said, I hope to have you back as soon as possible. Your contact information, I think, is in the posting, and if not, it was on that last slide there. It's kziewitz@gmail.com. And then, as always, folks, you can reach us at admin@sustainabletallahassee.org, or you can reach me at Mike Mitchell at sustainabletallahassee.org. So thank you all, and we will see you next month in October.
Thanks a lot. Good night, everybody. Regenerate.